The space station floated like a golden crown among the stars. It was the royal seat of the Stellar Dominion, one of the most powerful human kingdoms in the galaxy. Ships of all sizes came and went through its massive docking base. Rich merchants, powerful nobles, and military officers walked through its polished halls every day. On this particular morning, a small cargo ship approached the station. It was old and worn with patches of rust on its hull. The ship looked out of place among the sleek royal vessels. Inside the cargo ship sat a man named Jake Miller. He was 32 years old, with tired eyes and rough hands. He wore simple work clothes, stained with engine grease. His brown hair was messy, and he had not shaved in several days. Jake looked through the window at the grand station ahead. He took a deep breath. In his hands he held a small data tablet. On that tablet was years of his work. It contained designs for a new kind of shield technology. Jake believed this technology could save millions of lives. The alien threat known as the Void Swarm was growing stronger every year. Their ships were destroying human colonies on the outer edges of space. Jake had found a way to stop them. His friend Tommy Reed sat in the pilot's seat. Tommy was a big man with a friendly face and a loud laugh. He had served with Jake in the Earth Defense Fleet many years ago. Now they worked together as freelance mechs, fixing ships for whoever could pay. "You sure about this?" Tommy asked. He looked worried. "The royal court is not exactly friendly to people like us." Jake nodded. "Slowly, I have to try. This technology works, Tommy. I tested it myself. If the Dominion uses it, they can protect the outer colonies. They have the biggest fleet. They have the resources. They just need the right shields." Tommy scratched his head. "But why would they listen to you? You are not a noble. You are not even in the military anymore. You are just a mechanic now." Jake smiled a little. It was a sad smile. "I was a captain once. I saved a lot of lives at the Battle of New Houston. Maybe someone will remember that." Tommy did not look convinced, but he said nothing more. He guided the ship into the docking bay. The guards checked their documents and let them through. They looked at Jake's worn clothes with cold eyes, but they did not stop him. Jake had filed an official request to present his proposal to the royal court. The request had been approved, though he was placed at the very end of the day schedule. Jake walked through the grand halls of the station. Everything was made of white marble and gold. Paintings of past kings and queens covered the walls. Servants in fine uniforms hurried past him. Without a second glance, Jake felt very small in this place. He did not belong here. He knew that, but he kept walking. The throne room was enormous. Tall pillars reached up to a ceiling painted with stars. Hundreds of nobles and officers stood in groups, talking and laughing. At the far end of the room sat a golden throne. On that throne sat Queen Lydia Vance. She was 26 years old and very beautiful. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders like silk. Her eyes were sharp and cold. She wore a dress of silver and blue that cost more than Jake would earn in 10 lifetimes. A small crown rested on her head. She looked bored as she listened to the people presenting their cases before her. Doak waited for hours. He stood at the back of the room while nobles presented trade deals and military officers reported on fleet movements. The Queen barely seemed interested in any of it. She waved people away with a flick of her hand. Her advisors whispered in her ears and she nodded without really listening. Finally, Jake's name was called. The room grew quiet. People turned to look at him as he walked forward. He could hear whispers. He knew what they were saying. Who is this dirty man? Why is he here? What could he possibly have to offer? Jake stopped before the throne and bowed his head. Your Majesty, he said. His voice was calm and steady. My name is Jake Miller. I'm a former captain of the Earth Defense Fleet. I served for 12 years and commanded a destroyer at the Battle of New Houston. The Queen raised one eyebrow. A former captain, she said. Her voice was light and mocking. And what are you now? I'm a mechanic, Your Majesty. I repair ships in the outer territories. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Jake did not react. He kept his eyes forward. I have come to present a proposal, Jake continued. I have developed a new shield technology. My tests show that it can block the weapons of the Void Swarm. If the Royal Fleet uses this technology, we can protect the outer colonies. We can save millions of lives. He held up his data tablet. The Queen did not even look at it. Mechanic, she said slowly. She smiled. But there was no warmth in it. A grease stain. Nobody comes to my court to teach me about defense technology. She laughed. The sound was sharp and cruel. Do you think the Stellar Dominion lacks scientists? Do you think we need charity? Ideas from vagrant workers? The nobles laughed with her. Some of them pointed at Jake and whispered jokes to each other. Jake felt their mockery like knives in his chest, but he did not show it. His face remained calm. Your Majesty, he said quietly, I only wish to help. The Void Swarm is growing stronger. The outer colonies are dying. This technology can make a difference. I am asking for nothing in return, only the chance to save lives. Queen Lydia waved her hand. The gesture was lazy, dismissive. The Dominion does not accept proposals from beggars. We have proper channels, proper scientists, proper soldiers. She looked at him with cold eyes. You are none of these things. You are nothing. Leave my court. The room fell silent. Everyone watched Jake. They waited for him to argue. They waited for him to beg. They wanted to see him crawl. Jake didn't either. He slowly closed his data tablet. He placed it under his arm. He looked at the Queen. For a long moment, there was no anger in his eyes. There was no shame. There was only a deep, quiet sadness. Then he bowed his head one last time. He turned around, Dodd, and he walked away in complete silence. On his footsteps echoed through the great throne room. No one spoke. Even the mocking nobles had nothing to say. There was something in Jake's silence that made them uncomfortable. It was not the silence of defeat. It was the silence of a man who had made a decision. Tommy was waiting outside the throne room. He saw Jake's face and knew immediately what had happened. What did they say? Tommy asked. Jake kept walking. She made her choice, he said quietly. Now I will make mine. Tommy hurried to keep up. What does that mean? What are you going to do? Jake did not answer. He walked back to his old worn ship. He climbed inside and sat in his seat. He looked at the data tablet in his hands. Years of work, a way to save millions, and they had laughed at him. He closed his eyes for a moment. Then he opened them again. There was something new in his gaze now. A quiet fire. Take us to the frontier territories, Jake said. Tommy stared at him. The frontier? But those are the independent colonies. They have no real military. No Resources, what can they possibly do? Jake looked out at the stars. They cannot do much, he admitted, but they will listen, and sometimes that is enough. The old cargo ship pulled away from the Golden Station. It grew smaller and smaller until it was just another speck among the stars. No one in the royal court noticed Etla. No one cared about the mechanic who had come and gone, but they would remember him soon enough. The galaxy was about to change, and it would all begin with a man who chose silence over anger and action over words. 3 months passed since Jake Miller left the royal court in silence. The galaxy continued to spin. Trade ships move between colonies. People lived their lives, and far away in the darkness of space, the Void Swarm was preparing. No one knew exactly where the Void Swarm came from. Some said they were aliens from beyond the known galaxy. Others believed they were machines created by a dead civilization. Whatever they were terrifying. Their ships were black as night with strange shapes that hurt the eyes to look at. They did not communicate. They did not negotiate. They only destroyed. For years, the Void Swarm had attacked small colonies on the outer edges of human space. The attacks were terrible, but they were far away from the core worlds. The rich and powerful did not worry too much. The outer colonies were poor. They were expendable. That was the cold truth that no one wanted to say out loud. But on a cold morning in the 3rd month after Jake's visit to the court, everything changed. The Void Swarm launched its largest attack in history. 1,000 ships appeared from the darkness. They moved like a cloud of death toward the outer colonies of the stellar Dominion. The royal fleet scrambled to respond. They had 300 warships in the area. They were confident they had the best weapons, the best training, the best technology. Thought they were wrong. The battle lasted only 4 hours. The Void Swarm had new weapons, beams of purple energy that cut through the royal shields like they were made of paper. The fleet commanders watched in horror as their ships exploded one by one. They tried to retreat, but the swarm was faster. By the end of the battle, only 60 royal ships remained. The rest were dust floating in space. The Void Swarm did not stop. They pushed forward, destroying colony after colony. Cities that had stood for centuries were burned to ash. Millions of people died. Millions more fled toward the core worlds, packing onto any ship that could fly. The refugee crisis was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Queen Lydia Vance stood in her war room, watching the reports come in. Her face was pale. Her hand shook slightly as she read the numbers. 200 million dead in the first week, another 100 million in the second. The outer territories were falling like leaves in autumn. Her admirals and generals stood around her, arguing about strategy. They had no answers. Their shields did not work against the new swarm weapons. Their tactics were useless against enemies that did not fear death. The royal fleet was broken, and everyone knew it far away from the capital. In the frontier territories, a different story was unfolding. The frontier territories were a collection of independent colonies that did not belong to any major power. They were poor and scattered. Their people were miners, farmers, and traders. They had no real military, only a handful of old ships and volunteers who barely knew how to fight. Jake Miller had been living there for 3 months. He had taken his shield technology to anyone who would Listen, the frontier people had listened. They did not care that he was a mechanic. They did not care about his dirty clothes or his rough hands. They cared about survival. Jake had worked day and night. He had installed his new shields on 12 ships. They were old ships patched together from spare parts. Their crews were farmers and miners who had never been soldiers, but they believed in Jake. They trusted him. When the Void Swarm sent a force of 200 ships to destroy a frontier settlement called New Hope, Jake and his little fleet were waiting. The people of New Hope watched from their homes as the black ships of the swarm appeared in the sky. They knew they were going to die. They had heard what happened to the royal colonies. They had seen the footage of burning cities and floating corpses. There was no hope. That was what everyone believed. Then Jake's voice came over the emergency channel. This is Jake Miller to all ships. Hold the line. Protect these people. Today we show the swarm that humanity does not break. 12 small ships rose to meet 200 enemies. It was madness. It was suicide. Everyone watching knew it. The first wave of swarm ships attacked. Their purple beams fired at Jake's fleet. Beams hit the shields and something impossible happened. The shields held. The purple energy splashed against Jake's ships like water against rock. The shields flickered and glowed, but they did not break. The swarm fired again and again. The shields kept holding. Jake's voice was calm on the radio. All ships begin attack pattern. Target their lead vessels. Make them feel pain. The 12 ships moved forward. They were slow and clumsy compared to the swarm, but their shields protected them. They pushed into the enemy formation, firing their weapons. Swarm ships began to explode. The battle lasted for 6 hours. The swarm threw everything they had at Jake's fleet, but no matter how many times they fired, the shields would not break. Slowly the swarm began to pull back. First 1 ship, then 10, then 50. They retreated into the darkness of space. Dawn. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Swarm had lost the battle. The people of New Hope could not believe it. They poured out of their homes, crying and cheering. They had been saved. 12 ships had stopped 200. A mechanic and a group of farmers had done what the great royal fleet could not do. News of the victory spread across the galaxy like fire. Every news channel showed footage of the battle. Analysts studied the recordings, trying to understand what had happened. How had those shields worked? Where did they come from? Who was the man leading that fleet? The answer came quickly. Jake Miller, a former captain of the Earth Defense Fleet, a man who had gone to the Stellar Dominion 3 months ago to offer his shield technology, a man who had been laughed out of the royal court by Queen Lydia herself. The story spread even faster than the battle footage. People talked about the mechanic who had tried to save them. They talked about the queen who had called him a nobody. They talked about the silence in which he had walked away. In the royal palace, Queen Lydia watched the news report. She saw Jake's face on every screen. She heard the commentators praising him and questioning her judgment. She remembered that day in the throne room. She remembered his calm eyes as she mocked him. She remembered his silence as he turned and walked away. Her advisors gathered around her. Your Majesty, one of them said carefully, the people are asking questions. They want to know why we refused his help. They want to know why our soldiers are dying while his ships are winning. Lydia said nothing. She stared at the screen showing Jake's worn cargo ship, now famous across the galaxy. Thought another advisor stepped forward. There is only one option, Your Majesty. We must contact him. We must ask for his technology. It is the only way to save the Dominion. The Queen jaw tightened. She was proud. She had been born to rule. She had never apologized to anyone in her life. The thought of asking a mechanic for help made her sick, but the numbers did not lie. The swarm was coming. Her fleet was broken. Millions more would die if she did nothing. She closed her eyes. When she opened them again, her face was hard as stone. Send an envoy, she said quietly. Bring me his technology, whatever it costs. The advisors bowed and hurried away. They did not see the Queen's hands shaking. They did not see the shame burning in her eyes. Far away in the frontier territories, Jake Miller sat alone in his ship. The celebrations were over. The cheering had stopped. He looked at his hands, still covered in grease from the repairs he had done that morning. Tommy entered the room with a bottle of cheap wine. We should celebrate, he said with a grin. We just made history. Jake shook his head. This is only the beginning. The swarm will come back stronger, and the Dominion is still falling apart. That is not our problem, Tommy said. They laughed at you. They threw you out like garbage. Let them handle their own mess. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke softly. The people dying out there did not laugh at me. The children in those burning colonies did not throw me out. They are innocent and they need help. Tommy sighed. He knew that look in Jake's eyes. It was the same look he had seen at the Battle of New Houston when Jake had ordered his ship into certain death to save a transport full of civilians. So what do we do, Tommy asked. Jake looked out at the stars. Somewhere out there, millions of people were dying. Somewhere out there, a queen was learning a hard lesson about pride. We wait, Jake said. They will come to us eventually, and when they do, we will see if they have truly learned anything. The stars twinkled in the darkness. The galaxy held its breath, and Jake Miller, the mechanic who had turned away in silence, waited for what was to come. The Royal Shuttle was the finest ship ever built. Its hull was covered in gold and silver designs. Its engines hummed with perfect precision. Inside, every surface was polished to a mirror shine. It was a ship made for kings and queens, for the most powerful people in the galaxy. Today, it carried a single man. His name was Lord David Cross, and he was the most trusted advisor to Queen Lydia. He was 40 years old, with gray hair and sharp eyes. He wore the finest clothes money could buy. A golden badge on his chest showed his rank as First Minister of the Stellar Dominion. Lord Cross did not want to be here. He had served the royal family for 20 years. He had negotiated with alien empires. He had managed wars and treaties and trade deals, but he had never done anything like this. He had never been sent to beg. The shuttle approached a small space station in the frontier territories. The station was ugly and old. Rust covered its surface. Half of its lights did not work. It looked like a piece of garbage floating in space. Lord Cross felt his stomach turn with disgust. This was where Jake Miller lived and worked. This was where the most important man in the galaxy now made his home. A dirty mechanic in a dirty station, and yet the fate of the Dominion rested in his hands. Lord Cross took a deep breath and straightened his clothes. He had a job to do. He would do it with dignity. The shuttle docked with the station. Lord Cross stepped out into a narrow hallway. The air smelled like oil and metal. Workers in dirty clothes walked past him, giving him strained looks. He ignored them and walked forward. He found Jake Miller in a repair bay. Jake was lying under a small transport ship, welding something to its underside. Sparks flew around him. He wore the same worn clothes Lord Cross had seen in the news reports. His hands were black with grease. Lord Cross cleared his throat. Mr. Miller. Jake slid out from under the ship. He looked at Lord Cross with calm eyes. He did not seem surprised. He did not seem impressed. He simply wiped his hands on a rag and stood up. Lord Cross, Jake said. His voice was neutral. I was wondering when you would come. Lord Cross felt a flash of annoyance. This man should be honored. The first minister of the Dominion did not visit Colin Mechanics, but he kept his face smooth and polite. Mr. Miller, I come bearing a message from Her Majesty Queen Lydia Vance. He pulled a golden scroll from his coat and held it out. This is an official decree from the throne. Jake took the scroll. He unrolled it slowly and read the words. Inside, Lord Cross watched his face, looking for any reaction. Jake's expression did not change. The decree was written in formal language. It commanded Jake Miller to share his shield technology with the Stellar Dominion. It offered him a sum of money as payment. The amount was large but not generous. It was exactly what the royal accountants had calculated as fair market value. Nothing more. There was no apology, no acknowledgement of the Queen's mockery, no admission that she had been wrong. The decree was written as if Jake should be grateful for this opportunity. Jake finished reading. He rolled up the scroll slowly. Then he handed it back to Lord Cross. No, Jake said simply. Lord Cross blinked. He had prepared for many responses. Demands for more money, requests for titles or land, even anger and insults. But a simple no. He had not expected that. I do not think you understand. Lord Cross said carefully. This is a direct order from the Queen. The Stellar Dominion is the most powerful nation in the galaxy. When the throne asks for something, it is not a request. Jake shrugged. Then arrest me. Lord Cross stared at him. Excuse me. If the Queen wants to force me, she can send soldiers. She can drag me to the capital in chains. She can take my technology by force. Jake's eyes were steady and unafraid. But she cannot make me help her. Not like this. Lord Cross felt his face grow hot. Do you understand what is happening? The Void Swarm is destroying everything. Millions are dying. The fleet is broken. Without your technology, the Dominion will fall. I know, Jake said quietly. I tried to warn you 3 months ago. Your queen laughed at me. The words hit Lord Cross like a slap. He had been in the throne room that day. He had laughed along with the others. He remembered the way Jake had stood there in his dirty clothes holding his data tablet while the court mocked him. He remembered the silence in which Jake had walked away. That was a mistake, Lord Cross said. His voice was softer now. Our Majesty did not understand the value of your work. No. Jake agreed. She did not understand my value at all. She saw mechanics. She saw dirty clothes and rough hands. She decided I was nothing. He paused. And now she sends you here with a piece of paper that still treats me like nothing. A command, a payment, no apology, no respect, just another order from a queen who thinks she owns the galaxy. Lord Cross opened his mouth to argue. But no words came out. He looked at the scroll in his hands. He read the words. Again with new eyes, Jake was right. The decree was cold and commanding. It offered money but no honor. It demanded help but gave no thanks. What do you want? Lord Cross asked finally. Jake turned back to the ship he had been repairing. I want her to come here. Herself, Lord Cross nearly choked. That is impossible. The Queen does not travel to places like this. She does not meet with common people. It would destroy her authority. Jake shrugged again. Then I suppose she does not need my help that badly. Lord Cross felt panic rising in his chest. He had failed. He would return to the Queen with nothing. The swarm would keep advancing. The Dominion would fall. Billions would die. Please, he said. The word felt strange on his tongue. He had not said please in many years. I am begging you. Think of the innocent people who will die. Think of the children. Jake stopped working. He turned back to face Lord Cross. There was pain in his eyes now, real pain. I think about them every day, Jake said softly. I think about the people I saved at New Houston. I think about the ones I could not save. I think about all the lives that could have been protected if your Queen had listened to me 3 months ago. He walked closer to Lord Cross. Despite his dirty clothes, despite his low status, there was something powerful about him, something that made the first minister step back. I will help your people, Jake said, but not because a piece of paper commands me, not because someone offers me money. I will help because innocent lives matter, because children deserve to grow up safe, because that is what good people do. He pointed at the scroll in Lord Cross's hands. But if Queen Lydia wants my help, she will come here herself. She will look me in the eyes. She will speak to me like a human being, not like a servant, and then we will see if she has learned anything at all. Lord Cross was silent for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. I will deliver your message, he said quietly. He turned and walked back toward his shuttle. His fine clothes and golden bags felt heavy on his body. He had come here as a messenger of power. He was leaving as something else. He was not sure what. As the shuttle pulled away from the station, Lord Cross looked out the window at the ugly old structure. Somewhere inside, a mechanic in dirty clothes was changing the course of history. The Queen would not like this message. She would be furious. She would rage and scream and threaten. But in the end, she would have no choice. The void swarm was coming. The fleet was dying. And the only man who could save them was a former captain who had learned that silence was more powerful than words. Lord Cross closed his eyes and prepared himself for the storm ahead. Back on the station, Tommy found Jake staring out a window at the stars. What happened? Tommy asked. Did they offer you a fortune, a title, your own planet? Jake shook his head. They offered me nothing that matters. So what did you tell them? Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice barely above a whisper. I told him the Queen needs to learn something important. Power does not come from crowns or armies or gold. It comes from the choices we make, the respect we give, the people we lift up. Instead of push down, he turned away from the window. She made a choice 3 months ago. Now she has another choice to make, and this time the whole galaxy is watching. The stars twinkled in the endless dark. Somewhere out there, ships were burning and people were dying. Somewhere out there, a young queen was about to face the hardest decision of her life, and Jake Miller, the mechanic, who had walked away in silence, was waiting to see what she would choose. Queen Lydia Vance had never known fear. She had been raised in palaces of gold and marble. She had been taught that she was special, chosen by birth to rule over billions. Servants had bowed to her. Since she could walk, nobles had praised her. Since she could talk, she had never doubted her own power. But now, standing in her war room, she felt something cold crawling through her chest. It was fear, real fear, and she did not know how to make it stop. The holographic map in front of her showed the current state of the war. Red marks covered the outer territories. Each red mark was a colony that had fallen. Each one represented millions of dead. The Void Swarm had taken everything beyond the third defense line. They were moving toward the core worlds now, toward her capital, toward her throne. Her admirals stood around the table, their faces gray with exhaustion. They had no good news to give. The fleet was at half strength. Their weapons were useless against the swarm. Their shields were paper against the enemy beams. Lord Cross entered the room. He looked tired and small. Lydia knew immediately that his mission had failed. Well, she demanded, where is my technology? Lord Cross bowed his head. Your Majesty, Mr. Miller has refused your offer. The room went silent. Every eye turned to the Queen. Lydia felt her hands curl into fists. Refused. Her voice was ice. A mechanic refused a direct order from the throne. Yes, Your Majesty. Lord Cross swallowed hard. He has one demand. He says that if you want his help, you must go to him yourself. You must speak with him in person. Lydia stared at him. For a moment she could not speak. The idea was so absurd, so impossible that her mind could not process it. He wants me to go to him, she said slowly. Queen of the Stellar Dominion should travel to a dirty space station to beg a mechanic for help. Lord Cross nodded miserably. Those were his words, Your Majesty. Lydia slammed her hand on the table. The sound echoed through the room. This is madness. This is treason. I will have him arrested. I will have him executed. I will burn that station to ash. The admirals looked at each other nervously. One of them, an old man named Admiral William Grant, stepped forward. He had served the royal family for 40 years. He was not afraid to speak the truth. Your Majesty, he said quietly, if we arrest him, his technology dies with him. If we kill him, we lose our only hope. And if we attack a station, we become villains in the eyes of the entire galaxy. He paused. The people are already asking questions. They know he tried to help us. They know we sent him away. If we harm him now, there will be riots in the streets. Lydia glared at him. So what do you suggest? That I humble myself before a common worker? That I crawl to him and beg? Admiral Grant met her eyes. I suggest that you do whatever is necessary to save your people. That is what queens do. The words hit Lydia like a physical blow. She opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She looked around the room at her advisors and officers. She saw the truth in their eyes. They were all thinking the same thing. They all knew she had made a terrible mistake 3 months ago. She turned away from them and walked to the window. Outside, she could see her beautiful capital world spinning slowly in space. 10 billion people lived there, 10 billion lives That depended on her choices. She remembered her father, King Robert, who had ruled before her. He was old and sick now, resting in his chambers, but she remembered his lessons. A true ruler serves the people, he had told her. Pride is a luxury, duty is everything. She had not understood those words then. She was beginning to understand them. Now Lydia closed her eyes. When she opened them, her face was calm. Prepare a small transport, she said quietly. I will go to him. Lord Cross looked stunned. Your Majesty, you cannot be serious. The risk to your person, the damage to your authority. Prepare the ship, Lydia repeated. Her voice was firm. I will go alone. 2 days later, a small transport ship docked with Jake Miller Station. It was not a royal vessel. There was no gold or silver on its hull. Lydia had chosen the simplest ship available. She wore plain clothes, without any royal symbols. Only a single guard accompanied her, and she ordered him to stay on the ship. She stepped out into the station alone. Hallways were narrow and dim. The air smelled like grease and recycled oxygen. Workers stopped and stared at her as she walked past. Some of them recognized her face from the news reports. They whispered to each other, but no one tried to stop her. She found Jake in a repair bay, just as Lord Cross had described. He was welding a metal plate to the side of an old ship. Sparks flew around him like tiny stars. He did not look up when she entered. Lydia stood there waiting. She was not used to waiting. Queens did not wait, but she waited anyway. Finally, Jake finished his work and turned off his welding torch. He slid out from under the ship and stood up. He looked at her with those calm, steady eyes that she remembered from the throne room. You came, he said simply. I had no choice, Lydia replied. Her voice was tight with control. Pride. Jake shook his head. There is always a choice, Your Majesty. You made one 3 months ago. You are making a different one now. Lydia felt her face grow hot. I am here. What more do you want from me? Jake walked to a workbench and picked up a rag to clean his hands. He moved slowly without any hurry. He was not afraid of her. He was not impressed by her. He simply saw her as another person. I want to understand something, he said. In that throne room, you looked at me and saw nothing. You saw dirty clothes and rough hands. You saw someone beneath you. Why? Lydia hesitated. You were a mechanic. You had no credentials, no sponsors, no proper introduction. You came to the royal court looking like a beggar, and that was enough for you to dismiss me, to dismiss my work, to dismiss years of research that could save millions of lives. Lydia stopped. She did not have a good answer. She had never thought about it before. She had simply reacted the way she had been trained to react. Common people were common. They had nothing to offer. That was what she had always believed. Jake sat down the rag and looked at her directly. Let me tell you who I am. I served in the Earth Defense Fleet for 12 years. I commanded a destroyer at the Battle of New Houston. When the admirals ordered me to retreat and leave behind a transport full of civilians, I refused. I stayed and fought. I saved 3,000 people, including 400 children. He paused. After that, they gave me a medal and then quietly pushed me out of the military. I had disobeyed orders. I had embarrassed the admirals. They did not want a hero who did not follow rules. Lydia listened in silence. She had not known any of this. I became a mechanic. Because I still wanted to help people. Jake continued, I fixed ships for refugees. I worked on old vessels that no one else would touch, and I spent my nights developing shield technology that could stop the swarm. I did it for free. I did it because it was right. He stepped closer to her. I came to your court because I believe the Dominion could use this technology to save lives. I did not want money. I did not want fame. I just wanted to help, and you laughed at me. Lydia felt something she had never felt before. Shame, real shame. It burned in her chest like fire. I was wrong, she said. The words came out slowly, painfully. I judged you by your appearance. I judged you by your status. I did not see the man you truly are. Jake was quiet for a moment. Do you know what hurt the most? It was not the laughter, it was not the insults, it was knowing that my work, my years of effort meant nothing to you, that you could dismiss everything I had done because my clothes were not clean enough. Lydia bowed her head. For the first time in her life she had no words, no excuses, no explanations. I am sorry, she whispered. I am truly sorry. Jake studied her face. He saw the tears forming in her eyes. He saw the trembling of her hands, and he saw something else, something he had not expected. He saw sincerity. Why should I believe you? He asked softly. Lydia looked up at him. Because I am here. Because I came alone. Because I am standing in a repair bay in dirty air, apologizing to a mechanic while my kingdom burns. She took a shaky breath. Because I have nowhere else to go and no more pride left to protect. The silence stretched between them. Outside, ships came and went from the station. The galaxy continued to spin. The swarm continued to advance. Finally, Jake nodded slowly. Okay, he said. Let us talk about how to save your people. Lydia felt something break inside her. It was her old self, her proud and blind self crumbling away. In its place, something new was growing, something humbler, something stronger. She sat down on a dirty crate in a dirty repair bay and began the most important conversation of her life, and for the first time she listened. The war room of the Stellar Dominion had never seen anything like this. Admirals in golden uniforms stood beside mechanics in dirty overalls. Royal officers studied holographic maps next to frontier volunteers who had never been in a military building before. Two worlds that had never mixed were now forced to work together. At the center of it all stood Jake Miller and Queen Lydia Vance. They were an unlikely pair. A mechanic and a queen, a man in work clothes and a woman who had been raised in palaces, but they had spent 3 days talking in that repair bay. And something had changed between them. Not friendship exactly, but understanding, respect. The shield technology was being installed on every ship that could fly. Jake had shared everything freely, refusing any payment or reward. His only condition was that the Dominion fleet must work alongside the frontier volunteers. No more separation between the powerful and the common. One fleet, one humanity. Admiral Grant approached Jake with a data pad. The installations are complete on 200 ships. Another 100 will be ready by tomorrow, but the swarm is moving faster than we expected. Our scouts report over 3,000 enemy vessels heading for the capital. Jake nodded calmly. Then we fight tomorrow. Lydia stood beside him, wearing simple military clothes instead of her royal gowns. Is it enough? Can 200 ships stop? 3,000. Jake looked at the holographic map. Thousands of red dots were moving toward the blue dot that represented the capital world. 10 billion people lived on that world, 10 billion lives hanging by a thread. I do not know, Jake admitted, but we have something the swarm does not understand. We have people fighting for their homes, their families, their future. That matters more than numbers. Tommy Reed entered the room looking exhausted but excited. The frontier ships are in position. 32 vessels, not much, but everyone wanted to come. Even old Captain Emma Shaw brought her freighter out of retirement. Jake smiled at that. Emma Shaw had served with him at New Houston. She was 60 years old now, but she still knew how to fight. Tell everyone to get some rest. Tomorrow will be long. That night, the capital world glowed in the darkness of space. Lights from billions of windows sparkled like stars. People looked up at the sky, knowing that enemy ships were coming. Families held each other close. Children asked their parents if everything would be okay. No one knew the answer. In her private chambers, Queen Lydia sat beside her father's bed. King Robert was very old and very weak. His eyes were cloudy and his hands shook constantly, but his mind was still sharp. I heard what you did, the old king said softly. You went to him. You apologized. Lydia nodded, holding her father's hand. I had no choice. Robert smiled. There is always a choice. You made the right one. He squeezed her fingers weakly. I am proud of you, my daughter. You learned the lesson I could never teach you. Crown is just metal. A title is just words. What makes a ruler is how they treat the people who cannot fight back. Tears rolled down Lydia's cheeks. I was so blind, father. I wasted so much time. So many people died because of my pride. And many more will live because you found your humility. Robert said, that is what matters now. Go lead your people. Show them what you have become. Lydia kissed her father's forehead and stood up. She walked out of the chamber with her head held high, not with pride. This time with purpose, thought they. Next morning the fleet launched. 232 ships rose from stations and docking bays across the system. They were a strange collection. Sleek royal warships flew beside rusty freighters. Military destroyers took position next to mining vessels armed with welded-on guns. It was not a beautiful fleet, but it was a united one. Jake sat in the command center of a small cruiser. It was not the biggest ship or the fastest, but it was at the heart of the formation. Tommy sat beside him, running weapon systems. On the screen he could see the approaching cloud of darkness, the void swarm. Lydia's voice came over the fleet-wide channel. She was commanding from the royal flagship, but her words were for everyone, people of humanity. She said, today we face the greatest threat our species has ever known. The void swarm believes we are weak. They believe we are divided. They believe we will break. She paused. Her voice grew stronger. They are wrong. Today we stand together, rich and poor, soldiers and civilians, the mighty and the humble. We are one people, one family, one humanity. She took a breath. And we will not break. Cheers erupted across the fleet. On every ship people shouted and clapped. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Hope, determination. Jake watched the swarm draw closer. 3,000 black ships moving like a wave of death. Their purple weapons began to glow. All Ships, Jake said into his communicator. Raise shields, hold formation, trust the technology, trust each other. The first swarm beams fired. Hundreds of purple lines streak across space, striking the human fleet, and the shields held. Every ship glowed with golden light as the enemy weapons splashed harmlessly against the barriers. The swarm fired. Again and again, the shields kept holding. Jake leaned forward. Now we hit back. All ships attack pattern. Delta target their command vessels. The human fleet surged forward. It was messy and imperfect. These were not trained military units operating in perfect sync. They were farmers and mechanics and traders fighting alongside soldiers. They bumped into each other. They missed their targets. They made mistakes, but they kept fighting. The battle raged for hours. The swarm threw everything they had at the human line. Wave after wave of black ships crashed against the golden shields. Some human vessels were damaged. A few were destroyed when multiple swarm ships focused their fire on single targets. But for every human ship that fell, the fleet destroyed a dozen enemies. Jake moved through the battle like a calm eye in a storm. His voice on the radio was steady and sure. He directed ships to cover weak points. He called for wounded vessels to fall back. He pushed the attack when openings appeared. Lydia fought beside him, commanding her royal ships with new wisdom. She listened to her captains. Instead of ordering them, she asked for advice instead of demanding obedience. She was learning what it meant to truly lead. As the sun set over the capital world, something incredible happened. The void swarm stopped attacking. Their black ships hung motionless in space for a long moment. Then they began to turn, one by one. They retreated into the darkness. The swarm was retreating. They had never done this before. They had never been beaten so badly that they gave up. Silence fell over the fleet. Then slowly, someone started cheering. The cheers spread from ship to ship until the entire fleet was roaring with joy. They had done it against all odds, against all expectations. They had won. Jake slumped back in his chair, exhausted beyond words. Tommy clapped him on the shoulder with tears in his eyes. On the screen, Jake could see the capital world glowing peacefully below. 10 billion people were safe. 3 days later, Queen Lydia addressed the galaxy. She stood on a platform before millions of people, with cameras broadcasting her words to every corner of human space. Jake stood beside her, still wearing his simple work clothes. Today we celebrate a victory, Lydia said, but it is not my victory. It is not the victory of the stellar dominion. It belongs to all of humanity. It belongs to the farmers and mechanics who fought beside soldiers. It belongs to the people who believed in each other when no one else would. She turned to Jake. And it belongs to this man, Jake Miller, a man I once called a nobody, a man I once laughed at and sent away. He had every reason to abandon us. He had every right to let us fall, but he chose to help us anyway, not for money, not for glory, but because it was right. She bowed her head to him. The Queen of the Stellar Dominion bowed to a mechanic. The crowd gasped. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. I was wrong about him, Lydia continued, and I was wrong about many things. I judge people by their clothes instead of their character, by their titles instead of their actions. I built walls between the powerful and the common, and those walls nearly destroyed us all. She looked out At the crowd that ends today, I am announcing new laws to tear down the barriers between classes. Every person, regardless of birth or wealth, will have the right to be heard, to contribute to matter. The crowd erupted in cheers. Jake watched it all with quiet eyes. He did not smile, he did not wave, he simply stood there, a mechanic among kings and queens, and let the moment pass. Later, as the celebrations continued around him, Jake slipped away. He walked back to his old ship where Tommy was waiting. He could have been anything, Tommy said, a duke and admiral. They would have given you a planet. Jake shook his head. I never wanted any of that. He looked at his hands, still rough and stained from years of work. I am just a mechanic. Tommy, let me do my job. Tommy laughed and shook his head. You are the strangest hero I have ever met. Jake smiled. Maybe that is why it worked. He climbed into his ship and began powering up the engines. There were other stations that needed repairs, other ships that needed fixing, other people who needed help. The galaxy had called him a hero. History would remember his name. Songs would be sung about the mechanic who saved humanity. But Jake Miller did not care about any of that. He cared about the work. He cared about the people. He cared about doing what was right, even when no one was watching.